When modern theologians of the postponed kingdom variety tell us that Jesus actually came offering himself to Israel as a Davidic-type ruler, but that the Jews rejected him in this role, causing his announced kingdom to be postponed, they seem to have the case precisely reversed. The Jewish masses were at one time very prepared not only to accept him as their king, but to force him into just such a position against his will. It was he, not they, who rejected this idea. In order for the Messiah to assume the position of king over the world, it would be necessary first to unseat the world's existing king. This king was not Caesar, but Caesar's master, Satan. There is no way to properly grasp the nature of Christ's conquest of the world without understanding the nature of the world which he came to conquer. The real world exists in two parallel dimensions. We apprehend only the physical reality with our natural senses, but Jesus also perceived the spiritual dimension. In that realm, Satan had long exerted a hegemony over the Goyim, and to a very large extent over Israel as well. Satan was, in that sense, the ruler of this world. Regardless which human figure was enthroned in Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, or Outer Mongolia, the real ruler of this world, as Jesus called him, was the devil. Worldly rulers were mere dupes, serving unknowingly as vassals in a global hegemony that Jesus identified as Satan's kingdom. Satan is seen as the one who tempted mankind to sin, and who has, as a consequence, brought the whole race under the veil that is spread over all nations, death. Satan is described as he who has the power of death, and the sting of death is sin. The wages of sin is death, and since all have sinned, all have this wage awaiting them at the end of the long workday of this life. The realm of death as the just consequence of sin is Satan's kingdom. Whoever has sinned has inadvertently surrendered to his mastery. So long and so far as sin and death maintain their universal grip on the human race, Satan is in his element, retaining control over those subject to him. Humans may rise in rank above their peers and may even be enthroned over nations, but they never rise above the realm of sin and death, and all remain hopelessly under the power of the ruler of this world. This ruler's overthrow could only be accomplished by a hero who was not personally subject to the power of sin or of death. Successfully living a sinless life would uniquely qualify one to rule creation, a privilege first offered to Adam, who fumbled and lost it by his rebellion. If our first parents had lived without sin, they would be ruling the world that God gave them to this day, and we with them. A sinless person would be exempt from the claims of death upon him, since it is only the soul who sins that must die. This is why the Bible emphasizes the fact that Jesus successfully made it through life without sinning. In the end, he could boast, "The ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me." Christ had never sinned and was therefore not subject to the sin's penalty, death. What if such a one were to subject himself to that undeserved penalty nonetheless? Seemingly this would leave him with an unclaimed exemption, that is, an exemption from penalty of death, which he had deliberately not claimed for himself. Suppose, then, that God was willing to credit that unclaimed exemption to the account of undeserving but repentant sinners. That would seemingly cancel the death sentence against all of those to whom that credit was accounted. Further, since Christ's death was itself entirely unwarranted, he was apparently free to leave the realm of death at will. Death, by unjustly seizing one over whom it had no rightful claim, is thus itself condemned. By overstepping its proper authority, it has lost its right to claim those whom God justifies. Where does this leave the former ruler of this world who had the power of death? It would mean his involuntary abdication. All that remained to be done then would be for God to fill the office of world ruler with a new occupant, naturally the one who had dethroned the predecessor. Do the last two paragraphs make your head spin? It is not necessary for our rational minds to comprehend this, so long as God does. There is mystery in it, too deep a mystery for Satan, and possibly for us, to to grasp the nature of the sting operation. The devil thus fell into God's trap by engineering Christ's crucifixion, and caused his own defeat in the process. The rulers of this age did not understand the strategy. It was by the willing self-sacrifice of Christ's untainted life as the sacrificial lamb, and by his resurrection, that Jesus would save his people from the tyranny of their sin and the penalty of death. This strategy of conquest and liberation through Christ's death is summarized by the writer of Hebrews. Inasmuch then as the children, the ones needing rescue, have partaken of flesh and blood, that is, they were human beings, he himself likewise shared in the same. He became a human also, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. The dark side meets the light of the world. The demons who served Satan were no more informed of Messiah's mission than were the Jewish people. However, the demons knew better than did the people exactly who it was that had stepped ashore on planet Earth, having designs of global conquest. They also sensed that it was they, not the Romans, who were in peril as a result of his arrival. We read very little of demons in the Old Testament. There is the occasional mention of mediums who have a familiar spirit, and the rare case of an evil spirit coming to torment or confuse individuals like Saul. However, from the beginning of the New Testament, things seem to have changed. The demons seem to have come out in force. Israel was experiencing a veritable infestation. Demon possession was suddenly a common phenomenon in Israel. Everywhere Jesus went, he was called upon to deliver people from demons, along with healing the sick. People seemed to be very familiar with demon possession, speaking of it as a recognizable condition. They were able to distinguish the condition from ordinary illnesses requiring medical cures. When preaching to the household of Cornelius, Peter described the ministry of Jesus, summarizing his activities as going about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil. In the arrival of Jesus, the demons could see that the true king had landed upon what had heretofore been their undisputed territory. They had no doubt that it was in his power to torment them if he chose to do so. Their common reaction to being in his presence was to shriek in terror. They knew that even thousands of them together were no match for him, and sheepishly begged him to not send them where they did not wish to go. They were at his mercy, and they knew it well. Even their lord Satan knew Jesus was more than his match. He had sought unsuccessfully to eliminate Jesus at infancy through Herod's murderous attack on the infants of Bethlehem. He had met the adult Jesus in the wilderness only to find that his strongest temptations struck out against his unconquerable resistance. He could see that Jesus was plundering his own domain in casting demons out of his former prisoners. Satan's ability to resist was zero, like a man securely bound in his own house, watching with chagrin as home invaders methodically gather up for themselves his former possessions. Like a one-man invasion force, Jesus had stormed the citadel of Satan, confronted the Dark Lord on his own turf, and stripped him of his armor. Imagine the terror and desperation of the devil as he found himself disarmed and in the presence, for the first time, of one who was infinitely more powerful than himself. This is how Jesus himself described his own power over Satan. He said that he had bound and disarmed the strong man, and was plundering his house. Jesus pointed to this very activity as proof that the kingdom of God had arrived with him, when he said, "But if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, surely the kingdom of God has come upon you." This being so, imagine Satan's surprise when Jesus, at a certain point, as if on cue, seemed to halt his juggernaut campaign against Satan entirely, rendering himself totally vulnerable to being taken by his enemies, and being put on trial for his life. Though no one had seemingly understood his meaning, Jesus had earlier mentioned this plan when he said, "I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father." Nothing short of the command of his Father could have stopped his progress. The gospel campaign of the previous 3 years had been unrestrainable by any opposing power, and would have continued to be so had there not been a secret strategy to be implemented. While no one could take Jesus down apart from his own willful surrender, his strategy was to strike the final blow against Satan's throne by making the ultimate sacrifice of himself. As he put it, addressing those who came to arrest him, "When I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." The crucifixion can be seen as the power of darkness having its hour, but it would be the last hour that Satan would ever have occasion to relish. Because Jesus by his death canceled the record of sins and reconciled the world to God. His resurrection was the establishment of the new order and the first fruits of a future general resurrection of all mankind. Jesus, by this stratagem, stripped the devil of all legitimate power and authority over humanity. As Jesus himself put it after his resurrection, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth."